Okay, hi everyone and welcome to your final, the 5th out of 5 sessions of your thinking refresher training. So today we're going to look at retrieval practice. I'm going to again do kind of like a refresher level overview. Retrieval practice is something we're working on over the M3 schools at the moment. So please don't worry if it seems like a lot, because retrieval practice is really heavily grounded in the science of learning. If there are things I don't understand, I probably will cover them again, but send me an email. I'm happy to talk to you about it, because retrieval practice is probably one of the most powerful tools we have in helping children to consolidate and commit things to their long-term memory, which ultimately leads to them learning it. So this is a really, really important skill for us to be taking forward, and we can work it into our classrooms so easily once we understand. So the session objectives for today are to understand the science behind retrieval practice, to understand the use of retrieval practice, and to know how to use retrieval practice. And I always start by talking about it being like a dog with a bone. So retrieval practice is like getting the children to search for something in their brain and then bringing it back to you like a retriever. So when you throw a bone for a dog, you throw the bone, you put the knowledge into their head. Retrieval practice is asking them to go back in and finding it again. And to follow that with another metaphor, it's like treading down a path in a forest. The more they go back and retrieve the information, the easier it is for them to do it time after time. And when we talk about the science of learning, this is called developing a schema. So it's like a thought pattern that they become familiar with, and eventually they do it without any trouble at all. And that is when you know they've learned something, when they're able to retrieve that information from their memory with no additional help. So retrieval practice is, I've put this graphic on there because I really quite like it. So it's using things like think, pair, share, low stakes quizzes, flashcards, brain dumps. It is not the same as assessment, although sometimes it can look like testing, because it can be things like low stakes quizzes or getting them to write down everything they know so far. It's not to be used to measure them or to grade them, and it is not to be high stakes. If you make retrieval practice high stakes, the children become really concerned about it, really worried, and then their focus becomes all about that rather than the information. They're worried about getting it wrong. Should they know this? Were they present on the day where you taught it? It's more accurate for you to make it low stakes, light, a little bit of fun, quick activities. So it's just reviewing what they've learnt, but not just reteaching it. It is proven that retrieval practice, or the testing effect, is way more effective than getting the children to just relearn something. So the science behind it is retrieval practice is a study method that encourages students to engage with the material in an active way rather than passive learning. So it gets the children to actually do something. If you stand at the front and just say it to them again, they're passive in that as well. They might not be listening. They might hear the first part and think, I've heard this before, and switch off. Instead, you teach it to them once, and then you say to them time after, right, who can tell me this? Who can remember this bit? And that's why we call it the testing effect. Now, the language around it, the testing effect, can be quite negative, and it can cause the children a certain level of stress. So we tend to refer to them as like retrieval quizzes, or we make them into games, because we want them to not be worried about it. We want them to dive in and show us what they've really learned. But research shows that the more someone practices retrieval or actively engages with the subject, the better it is for their long-term learning. And to bring it up, Ofsted's definition of learning is when something has been committed to their long-term memory. That is what we are looking for. So it's a nice way to reveal the gaps that they have in their knowledge. You can say, right, with the person next to you, write down everything you can remember about the Greeks, and you might see then that none of them have written anything about the gods, and you might think, right, that is an area I need to cover. But it doesn't need to be assessment that you've then gone through and marked it. You know, you've taken that from it, you've got them to retrieve it, and they've strengthened all of their other memories. So instead of rereading and hoping that they know everything, retrieval practice forces them to spend more time going over those weak spots until they know the material. And our current shift towards using knowledge organisers really factors into using retrieval practice, because knowledge organisers are amazing for playing games. So Blank out parts of the knowledge organiser. Can they fill it in? Get them to test each other for 5 minutes at the beginning of the lesson with their knowledge organisers. Can they, remember what goes in there? Can they remember the definition of that word? So, it is frustrating, and it's a health warning that comes with retrieval. They do find it really difficult, and sometimes, that makes it frustrating in the classroom. It makes it harder to do, and it becomes easy to fall back on just re-explaining it to them. But the harder it is for them to retrieve it, the stronger the schemas they're going to build. You're not going to be there to tell it to them forever. You're not going to be there in the test or there at their next school or there in the next class. So help them to really learn it. Retrieval practice improves the efficiency of learning. So I'm going to take you through now some ways that you can use retrieval practice in your classrooms or with the children you work with. So using a quiz, and they can be teacher-led quizzes. You can do a quick fire one on the board. We do retrieval practice with our times tables in maths every day. I give them 5 quick fire questions, and we do it as quickly as we can. Then I say the question, they call out the answer, and it's done. It doesn't have to be written down. It's not recorded in their books. They can be quick quizzes. They could be self quizzes. They can be quizzing each other, but making sure that we're using the word quiz so that the focus is on the information rather than panicking because it's a test. It must be low stakes. I can't stress it enough. A brain dump is absolutely my favourite one to do. So at the beginning of my history lessons, I get a big piece of flip chart paper out and I say, right, tell me everything you know. You could get them to do it on post-it notes and you could stick them all together as part of your display. But it not only informs you about the gaps in their knowledge, but it also strengthens those schemas and helps them to really consolidate what they've learned before. Flashcards are a really nice one. They have to retrieve the information to make the flashcard, which is one stage of retrieval, and then they can use them to test each other, which is really good to see, because not only is the person who asks the question has to know the answer, but also the person answering has to know the answer to the question. So you're getting kind of 2 for 1 there, in that they are both going to be retrieving that information and therefore consolidating that knowledge. It's nice to see things like filling in the blanks. So if you're looking for ways that retrieval can be evidenced in their books, it can be a fill in the blanks activity. They could stick it in, they could write it down. Retrieval should just be like a 5-minute starter. It doesn't have to be a big task. It might just take a few minutes to kind of reactivate that prior learning. This is what I talked about earlier. So looking at the knowledge organisers, blanking bits out. Can they remember the definition of fieldwork? Can they remember what quantitative data means? Can they remember what accuracy means? It can also be turned into quiz activities. So these are some that we have done within the trust before. In fact, I think they're from our last meeting as an M3 school. Make it fun. So give them point systems, let them have that kind of that game element to it, and they start to really enjoy it. They almost don't realise how hard they are working in that moment. So you can have kind of different quizzes. So here's a quiz that they could just do on their own. They could circle the answers, then you could go through them, or it might be something that you put on the board. Again, I stress it doesn't have to be evidenced in books, because if it's happening, it will be evidenced in your data. Some nice little games here, some other lovely examples. But it can also be even simpler than that. It can be asking them questions about what they've learned before. We know from extensive research that activating prior knowledge, so getting them to think about the steps, how they've got there before, helps them to understand, to attach new learning together. So asking questions that get them to draw on what they've already learned is also retrieval, and this takes no time at all. And one final thing is, although it's not actually retrieval, I've done a lot of reading around it lately, and children learn so well from using songs or chants or mnemonics, and I thought this was a really nice place to put a little bit of information in about using songs and things. I have found that on YouTube there is a song for almost everything, and as the languages coordinator, there is a song for almost every topic in French, and my children love it. I found some lovely ones to use with our current topic about like doing clothes. And these are some from our meeting before about learning multiplication tables. Those songs takes a couple of minutes to find, a couple of minutes to put into your lessons, but it really helps the children to learn it. So your key takeaways from this session is retrieval is not reteaching. You are asking the children unaided to go back in and retrieve that information from their long-term memory. Every time you ask them to retrieve that information, they are developing what we call a schema. The stronger their schema, the more likely they are to retain that information in the long term, which means they have learnt that information. And there are lots of different ways that we can do retrieval practice. These are just a few of the ideas. You might have different ideas at your school. You might come up with different ideas yourself. And if you do come up with any great ideas, please do let me know so that I can keep updating our shared best practice guide. Retrieval practice should just be a few minutes at the beginning of every lesson, get them really strengthening those schemas and ultimately getting those children learning. Right, thank you very much for taking part in your refresher training. You've had 5 sessions now, and I appreciate they've been quite quick little videos for you to watch. Please do get in touch and let me know if there's anything I can help you with. And if not, I look forward to seeing you in your next training. Right, bye everyone.